Hey guys, hi, how are you? This is Domain 5. I think it's been a while. I have to start recording for you. Domain 5, Identity and Access Management. So do understand that this one is one of the core domain. Why I say that is because it is the starting point for all your engagements. So Identity and Access Management, also called as IAM, it actually ensures that you only have authorized entries that have access to the right resources. Okay, and this one is more of a perimeter security, which actually protect all your sensitive resources from any unauthorized access and misuse. So do emphasize on this domain. You might be having a lot of questions on this, and this is really the way to go or way to start for any of your engagement in cloud. Okay, let's move on. Domain 5, Identity and Access Management, IAM for short. And do note this is an important domain. Um, as a cloud computing, it introduces a new dimension while you're managing your IAM in comparison to your on-premise system. And anytime you are creating your first tenant or creating an organization in AWS or any other cloud provider, root will be your first domain account that you will be creating. Okay. Now, but IAM is actually the starting point. So you never use root for your implementation or your day-to-day activities. You start with IAM. So hence, this domain is kind of very important. So I emphasize again that give more preference into this domain. And if you're not clear, then go through the topics again. Thanks a lot. Okay. So when you understand or talk about identity and access management for cloud computing, you have to understand that an IAM can actually be spanning multiple organizations. So when I say multiple organization, it could be multiple tenants. So you have a main tenant, then you have subtenants within that. So that means all the billing is going to the main tenant, while there are services which is being used by the subtenants, and then the main tenant can manage the subtenants. Okay. In terms of a cloud provider, they use different systems. They have Active Directory or they have directory services as an one of the uh, architecture technology they provide you. They there you can also create your own accounts and let's say for example for AWS, it's a global service. That means the accounts can be created and can be used across. It's not confined to any specific region or location, right? So when it comes to a cloud provider, actually they give you access through web consoles or API to manage their environment. Okay, so this is where you actually use IAM heavily. So let's say you create a tenant. That tenant might have, or you create an organization that might have uh, root as your main account. Okay, but you don't use root on a daily purpose. So you use IAM, and with an IAM account you use or create multiple roles depending upon the policies, depending upon the attributes. So we'll come to that later. But a cloud provider will always provide you with a web console, which is actually managed through an API to perform your day-to-day task. Okay, this could be a command line interface as well. Now, some of the key terms, access control. So when I say access control, it's like you're trying to restrict access to the resources who can access. Okay, let's say who can create, read, update, and delete. So this is how you set the permissions for. On top of that, you have entity. So entity, it could be a user, a device, an application, could be tangible, intangible. Okay. Identity is how you define or how you recognize an entity. Okay. You have a set of characters. Let's say for a user, you have biometrics. So this is how you identify a entity. Okay. Identifier, when I say identifier, it could be a digital, which could be a token, could be a certificate, could be a username, password. When I say physical, it could be a driving license, a passport. So again, I am using an identifier to 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 give assurance of an identity, and that is related to an entity. Okay. When I talk about authentication, it's you are verifying the identity. That means whatever has been provided as an identifier, let's say a passport, you see that the passport belongs to the specific user and that user is the actual we are referring to. Okay, so this kind of an is called as authentication. Okay, so key things, I think there are more terms which are coming in the next slide. Let's go and go through them. Okay, let's understand few other terms. Authorization. It's actually when you permit or deny a subject access. When I say subject, is the entity. Okay. So when you're as a user, you log in, what access you should have on the data, on the network, on the application, what you can perform, what functions you can use. what kind of files you can open, access them. Okay, so this is called authorization. MFA, multi-factor authentication, very important term. You have to understand that there are uh, ways where you enhance your authentication. So MFA is a multi-factor. When I say multi-factor means it could be something you know, something you have, something you are. Something you know means let's say a pin. You know an additional pin, or something you have is like a token which is generating a pin for you, or something you are like a biometric. Okay, so they actually help you to prevent identity-based attacks. Somebody has stolen your credentials, they will not be able to use this because you have multi-factor authentication enabled. So they might need a second level authentication from any other device or face recognition. So hence that helps you to prevent identity based attacks. Persona is more of a user environment, user centric view. When the user interacts with the systems, how the system is perceived, how the system is actually uh, what kind of environment it is providing. That's called a persona. You can talk about as a profile. Okay, so when a user or a security analyst logs in, what kind of the same application maybe he might be seeing a different view, while a sales representative log into the same thing, he might have a different view. So it's a kind of a profile which is given to an individual entity or a user. Okay. Entitlement is what has been mapped. Understand the word mapping. So the mapping for the user that translates into authorization. So that means a X user is allowed to do some stuff. Let's say I give an example. An administrator is allowed to do a reboot of the server, reboot or restart of the services, patch, and but a normal user can only log in and check the logs. So this is where you define, you do the mapping of an identity to what it can perform, and this is called entitlement. So you will hear this word entitlement matrix. Very important term, very key term. So when you are working in any user account management, they always ask about, do you have an entitlement matrix? They are talking about, do you have a mapping for individual user to what they can perform? Okay. Now moving to attributes. Attributes can be a couple of things like a characteristics of a property, um, like an appearance or is a state. Uh, you can also think of as a attribute as a geolocation. So geolocation is another example. That means let's say my application is only accessible within Singapore or India, but if I'm a user coming from outside these two regions, this is where my attribute is, and this is checked, and this can be used for any kind of authorization or authentication. So these are the things which we actually use. Coming to a role, role is more towards how would I say is again is a permissions in a simple term. But I would say access levels. Access levels is like again going back to the same example, a set of administrators have access to perform a wide task on these sets of servers. Okay. Similarly, a sales or a finance person will have access to the spreadsheets, to the company data. Okay, for business reasons. So this is how you define a role. So when I say a sales role or security analyst role, so this is all what I'm talking about. Okay. Okay. Let's move to the next slide. There are a few more terms to cover. Okay. RBAC, ABAC, PBAC, and there will be a couple of other terms we will go through now. RBAC means role-based access control. This is where you define a role. The role can be a developer and administrator, and within that role, we give all kind of permissions we have granted to that. Okay, this is the most common, mostly used in all organizations. RBAC. So if you hear the word RBAC, it's talking about the role. Now comes to ABAC, which is attributes-based access control. So here you have an additional piece where you are actually checking an attribute. It could be a geolocation, it could be a multi-factor authentication. Okay, so this is kind of very important, especially when you're talking about clouds. There are multiple tags. So that means when you create a resource, you actually define a tag, and then you can actually define a role or access based on this attribute. Okay, so that is how you use ABAC. Policy based access control, PBAC, I have not seen much, but what I remember is more towards machine level. Okay, in within the machine, because the machine can read all these details. So is kind of more granular when I talk about attribute based or role based. So if you hear anything about a machine variable policy or machine policy, then it's talking about the policy based access control. Then access control and attributes based access control. This is more towards is kind of summarizing specifically on a version control repositories or a code base, because you can access or it's like a combination. It's like a combination. So you are using a role based access combined with an attribute and then defined as a policy base. Okay. Authoritative sources is actually you are validating that the identities provided to you are authentic. Okay. How do you do that? A third party check. When you access the HR system, actually you have list of employees, the employee data, but you are also sure that these are coming from an authoritative source, which is HR might have performed a background check, they have collected all the relevant documents, passports, or any degrees, certifications, so that ensures that the source is authoritative. Okay. Federated identity management, very key term. You will be hearing it a lot. So federated is something uh, users can allow multiple systems or applications using the same set of credentials. To give an example, let's say you create an account in Gmail on Google. The same account can be used in multiple applications, multiple websites. Okay, so in each and every website, you don't have to create your own account. What you can do is you can use Google as an identity provider, and then you can use that identity to access resources to those web applications. So this is how the federation works. Okay. So this is the key enabler for an SSO. Let's say you log into Google in one on your machine, and then you simultaneously open other application use which are accessing the same account, same ID. Then you don't have to re-log in again. So it actually gives you an access with the same ID. Okay. Relying party is more towards a service provider, which is providing the services to you. That means you are trying to access a training module. This training module, the website is linked with Gmail account. So you log into Gmail, then you access to the training account, and then you perform your training. You go through the training videos and all that. So this is how you actually they are called as a service provider. Okay. Okay, two more terms to go for. The first one is identity provider, in short IDP. Okay, this is actually source of your identity. Could be a Gmail account, could be a Microsoft account, Yahoo account. So if you say this is the account you have created, they have authorized you, and we are using the same account, so log into other resources. Okay, and so this identity provider is could be a cloud provider as well. You can use your cloud provider, or you can have your own Active Directory to provide an identity source. So use your Active Directory to log in, and then that identity is given access to the resources on the cloud, like your Office 365 is a very good example. So this is how it actually works. Assertion is something you have to understand. When the IDP, the identity provider, and relying party, which is the service provider, they they interact with each other, they need to have an assertion. So assertion will talk about what a subscriber, or what are the attributes or the references which are being added. Okay, what is needed or required for this validation. Okay, so when we do an assertion, we are referring to authorization, access control. So all this is defined mechanism between an identity provider and a relying party, kind of key term. Okay, now moving to 5.3, which is federation. So it's an identity federation, which actually I said is an IDP, identity provider, and a relying party. Okay, usually a cloud service or an application handling authorization. So it's more you have to understand how the access will be provided while we are reducing the effort of managing identity. Okay, so we are clubbing two systems together, they work hand in hand, so that your one portion is handling the identity, the other one is actually managing your access to the environment. Okay, how this assertion is done, there are common standards which are there, like SAML, OAuth, OpenID. So we start with SAML. SAML stands for security assertion markup language. In short, SAML, it is a XML based assertion. Okay, commonly used for the traditional web application, client server application, heavily used in the systems kind of. But this one is more towards authentication. Okay, the sessions are containing authentication statement. How do I authenticate? What will be the criteria? What will be the attributes? So it's more towards the authentication. Okay. The second federation standard is OAuth. OAuth is authorization. Okay. The authorization widely used for again web services. It's more towards the consumer services. It's only for authorization. Understand? It's not for authentication. Authorization that allows user to grant third-party application access. What they will be able to access, and it's more popular for the API access, connecting third parties to applications. So application to application, OAuth is something used quite heavily. OpenID or OIDC is actually an authentication. Okay, so it's an authentication mechanism, which is actually using uh, uh, OAuth as an authorization. Okay, so they are also used for commercial products. I've done a table. I got this table, kind of a good website, to the new.com. I think I have added the link, and also this table will talks about what is the purpose. So as it says, the purpose for OIDC is authentication, SAML is authentication, and OAuth is authorization. So in terms of use cases, you authenticate users across different apps. For the SAML, it will be authenticated users within an organization to provide single sign-on facilities. The SAML is basically used for that. Then OAuth is definitely granting access to resources. Technology-wise, it's built. OIDC is built on OAuth. Okay, while XML is used for SAML, and then there is another authorization framework used for OAuth. Okay, what kind of tokens? Yes, there are web tokens, which is JSON web tokens for OIDC. Then you have access tokens in OAuth. SAML is a accession. That means when they two communicate, it actually insert the information, right? What will be the actor provided, or actors will be IDP, a service provider. Similarly, if you see the last one for OAuth, you actually see service owner client authorization. Okay, so this is the difference. So single sign-on is one of the scenario for OIDC, then enterprise, federated SSO. If you see OAuth, you will see API access, which is a different entry if you are referring to the scenario. So when you talk about API access, you definitely are using OAuth, right? Okay. Then again, I think this is something I got. I think we can take it out, print it out, and then keep it handy. Very useful information. Okay, very important slide. Give some maybe time to digest this information. So how does a federated identity actually works? So the first thing is your identity provider and a relying party, they have a trust relationship. So identity provider, let's take an example. This could be a directory services. Directory server is something where you are defining your IDs, you are defining that what IDs will be using it, while your relying party is, let's say, a SaaS application, Office 365, to take an example. Okay, so that they both have a trust. So how this whole works? So when a user, as let's say you are the user, you log in, you open the URL, you try to provide your username, password, it actually goes into the relying party. Now with the trust between the relying party and identity provider, they exchange information, and your identity provider will actually insert some of the information. Could be a token, it could be any attribute which is requested. uh, that depends upon the SaaS application. So it happens seamlessly. So the request goes to the RP. The RP talks to IP. IP actually provides information back to RP, talking about a token, gives you a token. And for a user, it looks seamless. For the user, it looks like they don't have to enter the username password again. Okay, and this is what actually works behind the scene. So if you see, we are using a web browser, we have an identity provider. In your example or your company terms, you might have a directory server, which is where your IDs are created when you log in, control or delete, and then you log into the device. That's where you're providing your identity. But when you access the Office 365, you don't have to re-enter the details again. Maybe there could be a multi-factor authentication involved, but usually it allows you. So this is how the federated identity management works. Very important slides. Do make note of this. Thank you, guys. Okay. Federated identity, I think are pretty much clear that IDP and then RP, they work on a trust relationship. There could be a cryptographic operation and credential exchange, okay, to perform it. I also share how does it work with a scenario in the previous slide, okay. Now moving to how you manage identities, okay. So again, there are two parts. There are two fundamental decisions you have to make. From a cloud provider's perspective, they usually support internal identities. That means they provide you an option for IAM, Identity and Access Management, where you can actually go in, create your accounts. You can create account for individual, then you can see how they will be using this account, what will be the permissions granted to them. That's very important. So this is something they can have an automated process, or they could be a manual process. Okay, but again, cloud providers do provide uh, creation of identities internally. That's very important. Cloud customers have an option. So either they can leverage on the cloud provider to access all the identities, or they can also have a directory server, which can be an additional SaaS service, which could be internal or which could be through a cloud provider, or it could be a third party that providing your identity. Okay. So this is very important as a cloud customer. This is something you have to decide where you will be managing your identities. Okay. How it will be or what will be the architectural model. Okay. So possibly there are only two architecture, hub and spoke and freeform. In an hub and spoke, you have a central broker. When I say broker means it is a central party which is managing all your accounts. So everyone relying heavily onto that. That is a common repository for all your identities. Freeform is actually more of a directory service, but just more towards many to many connections. That means you have multiple identity providers, you have multiple uh, relying parties, then they all are integrated together in a multiple way. Example, one application or can have access to Apple ID, can have Yahoo ID, can also have Google, can have other identity providers, its own identity provider. So this is how it works. So only there are hub and spoke and freeform. Again, I can't give you which one is best or which one is better. In my terms, is just you have to understand these are the two possible architectures in when you are actually focusing on identity management. Okay, topic 5.4, strong authentication and authorization. Before we move, authentication is about verifying the identity for the entity. Then authorization is talking about the permission. Very simple, very easy. And then authentication, definitely you have multi-factor MFA, while your authorization is like RBAC, PBAC, or role-based, as I said, or policy-based or attribute-based. Okay. Moving to authentication and credentials, always remember, keep these two things in mind, MFA and passwordless, and where you will use what. Very important. MFA, multi-factor authentication, that means maybe you have something you know, something you have, something you are. You can have a hard token, a physical device, which is kind of known as a higher security and recommended best practice if you have highly privileged account. Let's say you have a system, a government system. It's always suggested that you have a token, not a soft token, but a hard token. Okay. Soft token comes which is something generated by a system. It's a code base. It is easily accessible. You have your mobile device, which you can use as an OTP or time base. It keeps changing. It could be a 6 digit, 7 digit, or a alphanumeric, depending. Okay. Out of band is referring to SMS. The only challenge with SMS is they are vulnerable to message interceptions and also SIM swapping. That means somebody can replicate or create a copy of your SIM actually, and then they can receive the SMS. So that is out of band. Biometric is again is kind of authentication is something you are. That means your facial recognition, your palm recognition, your facial structure, your voice, your thumbprint, all this, the fingerprints and all that is comes under biometrics. These days, you will even heard about passwordless authentication. So passwordless is more related to FIDO. FIDO is fast identity online. You can understand this as a pass key. That means I have this pass key. Maybe it is on a hard token. I just plugged in the token, and then let's say on a Google, I just go and log in simply. Okay, but that's then it's kind of a combination uh, of a hard token with something a passkey which could be a certificate or a token. Okay, so FIDO is one of the technology. Okay, but actually it's not recommended for administrative level cloud service accounts. Why? Because this same account or same thing can be used, bypassed, it's easy, and then it can uh, cause a lot of damage as well. So it's not recommended. While you use hard tokens for the highest recommendation, and then that's the best way to go for. Yeah. Okay, 542, entitlement and access management. So again, when you're talking about entitlement and access management, we are referring about authorization. Okay, so again, you have PBAC, which is supporting ABAC, and is one of the preferred model in the cloud. Okay, again, when you're using federated, you need to have an entitlement, you need to have a mapping. So from the cloud service provider, and uh, and from the service provider, which is a cloud provider as well, so you can use them. And then again, your cloud provider is responsible for providing your granular attributes and authorization. This is one best thing I've seen within AWS or other cloud provider, that they give you granular access. That means if you want somebody only to reboot or restart one of the service, we can go to that level. So this is something really, really uh, uh, fascinating, is really good to have. Okay, this is something I've seen missing in many on-prem environment, but with the cloud, I think the cloud providers are providing us with this granular attributes for authorization. Okay, I just added this table, which is actually from the book itself. It gives you like how does an entitlement report looks like. You have a service level 1, service levels 2, who can access, what they can perform, who is eligible, not eligible. So this is how you create an entitlement report. So if you need a reference, I think this is a good table to start with. Okay, this is the last slide, and actually the last concept, but very, very important. Always understand the two words PIM and PAM. Privilege Identity Management, that manages your identity. That manages your identity. So when I say identity, means all the life cycle of an identity, the creation, the deletion, the update, and the deletion. Okay, when we talk about PAM, is access management. That means privilege access management. How you will be providing access, how the systems will be accessed, what privileges they will have, how you're going to monitor them. So these are the key things. So understand about PIM and PAM is very useful. Okay. Now I got this table. I think this diagram, I really like it. So it gives you how they both and support any of the environment. So PIM, as it says, managing identity, those who are trying to access the data. Yes. Focus on user lifecycle for privileged account. Perfectly fine, right? I'm a user. I'm a user. My identity is created, but what I will be performing is something I define in PAM. So PAM is actually to monitor the privilege account. Let's say I'm an administrator, what I can access, what I can perform. Okay, this is how I define in PAM. Again, whether I have access to sensitive information, resources, especially for the user. So as a user, as an administrator, PAM is something I will be putting up the access. While PIM, I will be creating the account. Okay. Now how it helps? Both of them helps to enhance security, manage your privilege accounts. Okay. Managing the risk. How it manages the risk is minimize the risk. By how? You know that you have an entitlement report, you know what the user is needed, what is the role required, what will be the task they will be performing. So you do a combination. Okay. And actually it's very important to comply to any of the standard. All your standards will actually push you, whether you have a PAM, but when you talk about PAM, also check whether you have a payment in your environment. Okay. Hence, this all concludes the domain 5. I think is kind of very informative. I think you should go through PIM and PAM. If you need more information, just do a little bit of Google. I try to see if I can create a separate video for PIM and PAM, but again, I don't see a reason for at this point in time. Okay, that's it. Thanks a lot, guys. Thank you. Okay, I want to thank you again. So like and subscribe the channel, and I will be adding more videos soon. Thanks a lot.